producers and beat makers, myself included, aren't necessarily engineers. I certainly don't feel qualified to be an engineer, but as I make beats and as I produce, engineering is an aspect of both of those processes. For example, I mix my own beats. I've learned vocal production over the years. I've tracked sessions out. I've kind of had to do it all. And I think most producers experience that to a degree, even if they're not actual expert engineers. So we have a lot of questions as producers and as beat makers, as far as, when we post our stems to our beat stores, should they be wet or dry? What kind of headroom should we leave in our beats? What kind of equipment can we use to record vocals in our rooms if our rooms aren't acoustically treated? So wouldn't it be nice if we could ask all of these questions to Jay-Z's engineer or Travis Scott's engineer? That was a trick question because we actually did do that. If you tuned into the BeatStars Summit, which you should have, if you worked or something, or you were on vacation, or you were dating a Kardashian or something, you have a valid excuse. And all the videos are archived on beatstars.world. But what I want to do right now is show you the video, which was a conversation that was largely driven by questions in the chat with the legendary engineer Young Guru, yes, Jay-Z's engineer, as well as JusTheEngineer, who's recently nominated for a Grammy for his work with Travis Scott. We talk about everything from what kind of headroom to leave in your beats to what kind of equipment they recommend, what kind of plugins they use. Let's be honest, you're not gonna find these videos anywhere else. Why? Because I make them. So it would really help me out if you subscribe. If you've already subscribed, what also really helps is if you like the video and leave a comment. It's hard in the era of clickbait videos on YouTube and negativity in the producer community, and I appreciate your support. Thank you so much. I've read interviews with you, Young Guru, about your role in the process of the song creation. Mm-hmm. So beyond just focusing on the technical aspect of producing a record, as an engineer, how would you describe your role in the music production process, start to finish?
I think my role is a little different from other people because and it's not exclusive, but a lot of my career, people know me for the work with like Rockefeller and Jay-Z, things of that nature. So it became a situation where I'm highly involved in everyone's life in terms of the music making process. So, for a good, I would say a good 10 to 12 years, we were dominating and doing things in baseline. So it was sort of this Motown mentality of let's consolidate everything to this one place so that we could have some sort of quality control. And of course, it wasn't me by myself, but it's me in the recording process being able to be honest and ask specific questions about where the artist is going and sort of direct that career, in certain ways, whether or not that's, Freeway or the Young Guns or Beanie Siegel or Cameron or Jay-Z or, any of those people. I'm sort of the first person there that's like, do you think that this vocal is good enough? Do you think that this is the right beat? Are we going in the right direction? And not only is it a good, verse or a good beat, is it what we need at this particular time? My friend Salam Remy said something that really stuck with me one time where he was like, you need the right beat for the right artist at the right time. Like, those three things have to be there in order for it to be sort of a hit. It's like it could be a really good beat, but for the wrong artist. And I think that's a good thing for up and coming producers who may sometimes wonder why their beat gets denied, or they're like, yo, this beat is really good, but then the artist doesn't take it. And they start to feel like, well, what's wrong with my beat? And it's like, well, it might not have been the right beat for that artist, and then it's got to be the right beat for that artist at the right time. Like, you kind of got to know what's going on, in the music at the given time. So that's more of my role, outside of the technical, outside of picking the right microphone and the right preamp and knowing how to compress certain things or Jay-Z's vocal is going to be smooth. He's that type of rapper who doesn't, it's not going to be the same way as if I'm recording like MOP and they're almost like screaming at me. You know what I mean? The compression is going to be completely different. So it's those sort of choices that are outside of technical that really help direct certain artists. And sometimes you hear it, it'll make it to a record where you'll listen to Freeway's first album and he'd be like, okay, Goo, you want me to mess with this? And you hear him saying it, which means we had a conversation about where he should go on a specific beat. And sometimes it's like, we have 10 records already. what do we need to fill in for the rest of the album for this to be a complete body of work? Or, you know, switching gears now where sometimes artists aren't putting out complete bodies of work, where we're just putting out singles or just songs on the internet to gain attention in between, sort of like what mixtapes used to do, you know, back in the day. You're in between album cycles, but you want to stay hot. So you're just throwing out records, but are you throwing out the right records? So it's the mental process of, are we doing the right thing? And you need somebody in there that you trust. So I'm sort of like the first line of defense of raising my hand and being like, nah, you can do better than that.
So I personally feel like that should also be a producer's role, even if they don't engineer.
Absolutely.
Having said that, though, for me, in my experience, it started when I was in high school, just having people come by. I wasn't getting paid anyway, so I was already sick of these people in my house all the time. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, if they're offended by what I'm telling them, they can leave. I'm not here to just, you know, spend my whole day wasting time on their project. So that's kind of how I developed that. How did you get to the point where you felt comfortable? Because a lot of producers don't, just flat out saying, that's not the right take, you can do better, try it again, or this beat isn't you, or, you know, your delivery right there just wasn't what it could be.
That's a great question and a great point. I came up through a certain school where, like, people like Derek Angeletti, who was part of the Bad Boy team of Puff's producers. So I would look at certain bits and pieces of people's personality. Like, we had some producers in there that were part of the Hitmen that were quiet, and they just, you know, just made beats all day. And you would look at Derek, and Derek would be the one, like, literally telling the Notorious B.I.G. that that's not good enough. You know, his personality sort of leads to him directing a lot of things, and I would take those things from his personality and apply it to when I was doing my sessions. But it's also me being comfortable with the artists that I work with. You know, sometimes it's about kicking it with them before you even go into the session, so that you know who they are, they know who you are. And my biggest thing was, I never am trying to make you into who I want you to be. I'm trying to make you the best you. So, you know, a lot of times I had to fight things working in record companies and things like that, to where a record company might see success with one artist and be like, hey, we need a vet. And it's like, well, there may not be another one of those. And you're going to try to force your artist into this like cookie cutter thing that doesn't exist. So it was me getting comfortable with saying, I'm trying to design the best you of what I think is the best you. So it also comes from experience of putting out records and seeing what works and what doesn't work. So then the more experience you have, the more comfortable you feel. But one of the great things that we get with technology is being able to like email beats to each other and do things that way. But we also lose this thing of the producer sometimes not being in the room with the actual artist when they're creating the song. So you're right. As the producer, it's not just your job to make the beat. That's a beat maker. As the producer, you're supposed to be in there saying, no, that's not right. You should do it this way. Why don't you try this take again? Your inflection should be this way. Why don't you, pause here, take out a couple words like the does and the is, and, it'll make the flow go better. All of those things are part of production. So that's how I got comfortable, was just doing it over and over. But again, like I'm saying, I was part of a crew, and I'm part of a crew of people that trust me. So it made me just get into that mode, so that when I was stepping in with artists that wasn't part of my crew, I still had that thing in me that tries to make it the best record. But I'm also aware of how I'm speaking to the person. So, I have 4 children, right? I speak to all my children different because of their personalities. That's the best way for me to explain it. So I'm trying to get the same point across to my kids, but I may say it different for all of them because their personality is different. And I know that the way that I say it affects how they're going to receive it. So that's the producer's job as well, is to learn the artist and learn how to communicate with them. That's a big part of it. But that's a huge question, because some people are iffy if it's your first placement, if it's your first time in with a big artist or just anybody. You get a little nervous on like, well, should I say something? Should I not say something? You're always supposed to say something. So the thing you don't want is for your art to come out and that's not the way you wanted it to come out. So it's better for you in the beginning to just get those things out and try to work with the artist, and they'll appreciate that, even if you don't agree. You know, even if the artist is just like, hey, I want to do this, or I want to do that, you argue about it for a minute and they still go with their way. It's something where they now know you're not just a yes man. Nobody wants just this yes man around them. And you know, you have to have that sort of relationship with the artist to be able to just talk to them.
So let me throw that original question back to you, Jus. What would you say your role is throughout the whole process, as just, you know, because obviously you're making beats too, so I assume that you find yourself in situations where you are engineering a session for a beat that you produced as well, and so I'm sure you're going through a lot of you know, the whole process in your head of being a visionary and then also engineering, but then it's all hitting you at once.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, like Guru said, like a lot of those points in there, you know, how you talk to the artist and just reading the room. I think a lot of times, you know, when I start off, you know, as just playing the engineer role, I think in today's day, you know, there's so many schools now that are just pushing out engineers. You know, you go to school for 6 months, and next thing you know, you're an engineer after 6 months. So a lot of times when these artists are booking the sessions, unfortunately, they're really just expecting me to be quiet and press the buttons. So in my mind, one, that's what I need to do, but I also need to make sure that I do that better than anyone else they've ever seen, so that when I do open my mouth and, you know, like we were saying, it's how you say it to people. I'm not going to say to somebody, you can do that better. So I might say, hey, do you think you can do that better? And they might go, yeah, I think I can do that better. Let's go. And then they're hyped up because they're thinking, oh man, he's really listening to me. He thinks I can do better. Let's push this even further. And it's really building that relationship with the artist that you're working with. And some of these artists, you know, they may not want your input, and it's nothing personal. I mean, you have a role that you're playing in that studio or wherever you are at. And you got to remember that sometimes you just need to play that role. You know, with somebody like me, you know, where I focus mainly on engineering, a lot of times there's another producer and there are multiple producers. And when they're making a beat, a lot of times it's not my spot to go, hey, change that 808, change this sound, change that sound. Because they're going to look at me and go, you know, it's your turn. When we pass you the beat and you turn on the microphone, that's when you go to work. So it's really just reading the room, knowing who you're with, and, you know, speaking up and knowing how you're saying things to people, because this is people's art. You know, it's our production, it's our engineering, it's the artist's lyrics, it's the artist's music. So, you know, we do take these things personally. So just watch how you're saying things there.
I think to add on to what Jus is saying, and the way you said that is perfect, phrasing things in a question alleviates a lot of problems. Like if you're saying a definitive thing, sometimes you may just want to ask it phrase it in a question. Or there's a very famous engineer who has like this big Mickey Mouse in the side of the studio, and that Mickey Mouse is there to remind you of questions or fantasy, right? That's what the paper plane represents for us at Rock Nation, right? Imagination. That paper plane is you folding a piece of paper, you know, imagining, you know, this being a plane. So I'm saying that to say that instead of you going, yo, we should use this microphone, it's like, what if we use this sort of microphone? Or what if we tried a different 808? Or what if we tried it this way? Works better than all these like definitive, like you did that wrong, let's do it over. You know, and phrasing it in a thing of, well, let's try this, because that, you know, you never know what could happen when you're just like, that's the creativity part. Let's try this. And what Jus said is perfect. It's like sometimes you have artists that they know exactly what they want to do. They're very well trained. They have this thing that they're doing, and you're just quiet and you're recording, and that's all you're there for. There's some artists that have never been in a studio before. It's just, you know, some girl that sings really good in church, and she's never, you know, she's in her comfort zone. But some people, when they see that red light come on, you know, in the studio, they get nervous. So you may have to be the person that says, okay, can everybody clear the room so this person can feel more comfortable? Or, you know, instead of asking that question in front of this rapper's whole crew, say, yo, can I talk to you in the hallway real quick? And then they're going to be more apt to give you a real answer instead of trying to keep the, you know, this bravado up in front of their crew. So you got to be real, like you said, read the room, be real aware of what's going on and who's in the actual room. So Those things are talents that they don't teach in the school, right? The school is there for you to learn how to like move the chess pieces, but that doesn't mean that you're a master chess player. You just know how to move the pieces. Now somebody got to teach you strategy of chess, you know, and hopefully that person has played a lot of chess and has gone up against masters and has been in situations before, and they're like, yo, when somebody moves the rook this way, look out for this. So that's what I can equate it to. When you graduate from the engineering school, you're basically just now you just know how to move the pieces. But I got to teach you the psychology of actually running a session and getting the best performance out of an artist.
So let's talk about some more technical questions having to do with engineering. I know from the outside looking in, engineering is a pretty unclear and oftentimes myth-filled world. And so when I spoke to, and shout out to Illmind, he's in the chat. What's going down, sir?
Big up Illmind.
When I asked on Twitter what producers' concerns with engineering were, it kind of reminded me of where I was a long time ago. Shout out to Mac Joseph as well. He says, shout out to Guru for coming through to visit Isotope and that you're amazing. So shout out to him. You know, when I first started, I really didn't understand engineering, and a lot of people don't. And that was evident in a lot of the questions I was getting. One big question that kept coming up was, what is mixing versus mastering? And I think not just producers, but also recording artists and even some, you know, beginner engineers get those two terms conflated. What is a way that you separate those two processes and concepts in your minds?
Just go ahead. I feel like I'm over talking, so I'll go after you. Go ahead.
I mean, I've definitely had people ask this over and over. I mean, the only way that I can try to explain it for the people that have no knowledge in engineering at all is I try to, I guess, compare it to a photographer. You know, you have a photographer that goes out there, he snaps your picture. That's the recording process. He doesn't just snap that picture and hand it over to you and say, all right, you're done. Here's your wedding picture. He's then going to go in and he's going to touch up little things on there. He's going to, you know, adjust the brightness, adjust the colors. That's your mixing process. After that, he's going to go through and maybe put a filter or, you know, something over the entire image. That's your mastering process there. You're taking that final mix of the song, and I guess from what they taught us at school is you were making it as loud as it can possibly go without getting any type of distortion, you know, messing up any elements of the mix, and also maybe fixing up some of the little things that they couldn't get done in the mix, you know, whether it be that low end or that high end, or just making things radio ready. So you're pretty much, you're taking that final project and putting that, you know, final layer of polish on there.
Right. Traditionally, traditionally the mix was you have a bunch of instruments as a song, vocals, all this other stuff. You put it together as a song, right? You're EQing, you're compressing, you're, you know, a producer is deciding on drops, all of these things inside of a mix to make a song. Traditionally, we will be doing this in the context of an album. So you may have had 3 or 4 different engineers mixing different records, you know, that are all going to go on one album, right? They could have been done in different rooms at different times. You know, they're going to, the volume of these are going to sound different. So back when we were making CDs, you know, you would master what we call into a red book format. And not to overcomplicate it, but I'm, as the mastering engineer, now taking 12 different mixes and I'm making them sound like one cohesive thing. I'm making sure that the volumes are all the same or relatively the same. I'm making sure that EQs sort of match so that this sounds like, you know, one cohesive album. Mastering engineers back in the day were also doing things like putting the P and Q codes on it, which was like when you put the CD in, it says number 1 and it has the title and like has all of those things were done at the mastering process. So me as the mixer, I was making sure that I gave enough space to the mastering engineer for him to be able to add EQ or add compression and those sort of things. You know, I was letting the track breathe enough that a mastering engineer could now put all of those things together. And like you said, it's sort of like a final shining up before an album. But we also live in a world now where people aren't necessarily just making an album, right? You may make one song and master that one song. So the mixing process is me getting it together as a vision of what I want the song to be. The mastering engineer is giving that final step. And a lot of times I like to give my music over to someone else so that there's fresh ears on the mix. If I'm sitting through a whole project and I've, mixed all of these different things, I may want someone else that I trust to listen to it and say, okay, well, here's where you were making mistakes. And not even just mistakes, it's perspective. They're listening in a different room. They're listening, from a different perspective. They haven't sat in with me when we were arguing about the snare for 3 hours or whatever, like those things that we sort of concentrate on. Someone has an outside perspective. So mastering for me is like, I built the car and this person is now deciding like, okay, it's going to be this red candy paint and we're going to put this stripe right here. Same car, but it's like, what color am I going to make the car? What rims am I putting on the car? It's that final thing before I put it out in the showroom to try to sell it.
Got it. So, God, we have a ton of questions coming in. So shout out to that. A lot of it has to do with, the DAW Wars, what's the better DAW, what's for mixing and for such and such a purpose.
The one that that's the best one. The best DAW is the one that all, it doesn't matter which one you work in, it's which one you master. I just put up a tweet the other day where I was like, it's better to just master a couple of plugins than to be this guy that's like, every time a new plugin comes out, I got to buy the new thing. As engineers, a lot of times we have to have certain plugins because I get sessions with, various plugins on it. So I want to make sure that I have all of those plugins. But to really answer that question, it's figure out the DAW that works best for you or the one you like the most, and then just work in that one. I don't care if it's Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton, whatever it is, just master whatever it is, and then find out, you can dibble and dabble and like see which one is more comfortable for you or which one works better for you, but you can mix in any of the DAWs. So which one do you like? Which one do you master? Which one do you spend the most time with? Which one are you going beyond just watching a couple videos on YouTube and after you've kind of figured out how to work it, actually reading the manual? I don't think anybody does that anymore. Like just actually sitting down and like, on a Sunday, while you're sitting there, just read the manual, do a chapter a day, and you'll start to find little things that aren't talked about on YouTube, because a lot of times people are so concerned with like tips and tricks and things of that nature that you don't get to the core bread and butter of what this DAW could do. So, it just depends. As an engineer, you got to kind of be aware of what the major things are. So yes, if this percentage of your stuff is coming in Pro Tools, and you're going to have to learn Pro Tools. But, if this percentage of your stuff is coming in Ableton, then learn that. If this percentage of your stuff is coming in Fruity Loops, learn that. So it's the real answer to that is the one that the best.
So in the end, they're all going to do all the same things. So as long as you got a good sound that comes out of it, that's all that matters.
So here's a question for both of you then. Because you used the phrase good sound. Obviously, a ton of this, and you both commented on this as well. You went to school, you learned how to move the chess pieces, but you didn't learn how to become chess masters.
Right.
Learning how to become a chess master, metaphorically speaking, period. I mean, there are people who understand on the production and beat making end exactly how to make a beat. They know all the steps. They know the technical elements that go into it. They just haven't figured out how to make a good beat yet. So just mentioned making a song sound good. How did it come to the point where you were able to hone in on that X factor? And what I mean to say is, how did you train your ears to actually know the difference between a good mix and a bad mix? How did you train your ears and your brain to the point where you're able to walk into a session and analyze what this particular artist with this particular style and voice needs on a sonic and technical level?
I mean, for me, it just took time. It took a lot of bad mixes, a lot of bad recording, a lot of making mistakes. The first studio I interned at in Atlanta, I was there for a year, unpaid, scrubbing floors, doing food runs, but being able to stand in the background and watch that engineer work and record and interact with these artists, and just seeing the little tips and tricks, not tips and tricks, but the little things that they would do during the session, and then being able to ask them after, saying, why did you do this? Why did you do that? and not really copying what other people are doing, but seeing how you can implement in maybe some of the things that they do into yours. And then just over time, I've been, I'm 30 going on 31 years old now. I've probably been at this maybe for like 10 years now. So it's just time after time, just doing it over and over and over. And I think eventually when you're a few years in and you listen back to your stuff a few years ago, you're going to hear night and day difference and know that you're at least making it somewhere.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just listening to good music, listening to music that you feel, sounds good. So when I was coming up, there's a couple of things. One is listening to music, and I would choose albums that I thought were really good and reference them in a lot of different places. So, that was me listening to Bob Power and what he was doing with like Tribe and people like that. And then, the clarity that Dr. Dre started putting into our music. Like back then, we sort of like had the bottom end together in hip hop, but I thought like the top end needed, better adjustment. And then Dr. Dre comes and just starts smacking with like these incredible mixes that was like really heavy, but really clear. And then had a lot of, movement. And when, I went through this phase of when hip hop was really mono and everything was sort of like in the center. And then we got to a point of like sort of thinking like an orchestra and spreading things out and then watching the movements over time. So it's like, as I'm trying to develop my sound was sort of like me purposely saying, I'm going to have this mixture between what Bob Power and what Dr. Dre sound like. And then me studying sort of all of the things that came out of Atlanta and being like, okay, let me study how these 808s are done. What are they doing to make this music sound like this, right? When the Atlanta movement just sort of took over because it was different from what I was doing. And that's when I perk up. That's when I'm like, okay, this is outside of my thing. So let me start studying that. And then I would just keep studying good engineers. Like, Ali's vocal tricks. When he's doing stuff for Kendrick, I'm studying like, okay, what is he doing per se to make these vocals sound like this, or these effects sound like this, or I'm studying 40 to be like, what is he doing on Drake's vocals to do this, and this? And in I kind of like to guess at first, because then I come up with things that may not be the way that they're doing it, but it's something new for me. Then I'll eventually, I have the bonus of being able to like literally ask those people, like, what did you do on this specific mix? But the second part of it, which I think is just so missing right now, which is the reason why things like this are necessary, is that I came up at a time when studios were just booming, right? Especially in New York City, those things aren't around anymore. And you sort of lose that thing of like us being able to like, in one day I could walk around in the studio and just see who was there and say hi to people. And I'm interacting with 5 or 6 different world-class engineers, and they're working on 5 or 6 different types of music. So it was normal for me to be walking down the hallway in the Hit Factory, and it's like I run into 50 Cent, and then in the hallway we're having a conversation with Tony Bennett. Like those things would go on in New York. So it was like me going through all those different rooms and saying hi to people and keeping a good rapport with a lot of the engineers allowed me to see what they were doing. And then just the blessing of me being connected with, say, a Chucky Thompson, who purposely put me in a room with other engineers. So it's like I'm watching what Joe Quindy's doing. You know what I mean? I'm watching what Tony Maserati is doing, like live on mixes. So those were the things that allowed me to go, okay, this is a good mix. This is a bad mix. These are some of the things that need to be fixed, and this is how you do them. And also that thing of, even in the recording process, I wish that sort of thing was still around, where when you used to intern at these different places, when there wasn't a session, you could literally go grab somebody's reel and put the song up and try to make your own mix. Like assistants used to do that all the time and be like, okay, let me see how this person got to that point. Like sort of like what people do now with stems. If you can get stems of certain, records that you've seen and try to recreate those mixes. Or, I had the experience of just opening up a mic closet in the Hit Factory or Sony or something like that. And every microphone in the world is there. And I could literally just test out microphones and see the difference in the sounds of those microphones. I just wish that thing was still alive for people nowadays. So that's part of the reason why, again, these things are so important, to try to impart that sort of thing that you don't learn anymore by actually being in those facilities.
If I can add on to one thing Guru mentioned too earlier is those manuals for plugins. I know maybe years ago, there was at one point where something happened with my computer and I deleted all of my cracked plugins, and all I was stuck with was the stock plugins, but I had to learn those in and out, and I had to pull up manuals on each one to see, what does this knob do? What does that knob do? And that really taught me how to go in there and fine tune what I wanted. So then when you get these plugins that you're paying extra for, when they only have 2 knobs that do what you need to do, you know exactly what you want out of that sound. So, I mean, read those manuals, and especially nowadays, you could download a manual and you could search through the manual in a PDF. You don't need to, buy the book and read through it there. So, we got all the tools that we need. You just gotta go look for them and do some research and read a book.
And those plugins are really like, it's almost like the old Gangstar album where it's like, yo, we just update our process. You know what I mean? It's still Guru and Premiere, but we just update the process. So these new plugins are just our calculators to me. You know what I mean? When we were adding by hand before, and it's just like now we have plugins that allow us to have a calculator. So it's like, do I know how to add? Yeah, but if I work as an accountant for a Fortune 500, I need a calculator and a computer because it allows my work to speed up. So those things that we used to do that took forever. If if I had a vocal, right, and I'm trying to do subtractive EQing, which I would encourage a lot of people to learn how to do, right? I don't necessarily get a vocal and just start adding things on, which I see a lot of engineers do. I analyze it and I go, what's wrong with the vocal? What do I need to take out, right? It's too muddy. Okay, well, let me go to this. Now, here comes my knowing how to move the pieces, my knowledge of, well, what's the muddy range? Right? You know what I mean? So I'm going in between like 200 and 400 and I'm like searching. And if I'm on analog gear, I would literally find that frequency or turn it up to +10 and sweep through frequencies to really hear where the mud is coming from. And then I would take that thing that's on +10 and turn it down and take it out. Right? But that's a real super static thing. I only can do this one frequency with this one range compared to the tools that we have now that can literally follow whatever the frequency is in that particular thing. Or we have dynamic EQs now that not only can I dip it, but I can compress it and tell it so we have these hyper calculated things now that allow me to do things way faster than what I was doing before. Or there may be some things now that I don't need to compress because I got clip gain. One of the greatest things is going through and going, okay, before I even compress this vocal, why don't I even it out with clip gain? I can literally sit there and go, okay, this part, this utterance, not even the whole word, just this part of the word is too loud. So let me just highlight that and clip gain it down with everything else. So now I'm compressing more for texture than I am for just volume control. So, those are the things that are like calculators that have allowed my work to speed up. But also I know the original, idea of what I was doing. So it's like the idea doesn't really change, but the tools have gotten so much better.
I see a lot of people talking about the replay of this. So yeah, beatstars.world is kind of the one-stop shop for all of this. So again, I have to mention all the new features with BeatStars, including Sony ATV publishing admin, as well as distribution, and then also the racial justice initiatives and the archives of this summit, as well as also the fact that I'm on every Thursday, Dame is on every Monday. All of these sessions are free. They're all equally interactive. We always have guests. We always have topics that are relevant to the conversation for up and coming producers. So to pick up on this conversation and a lot of the questions that were coming in the chat, and, rather than jump into the analog versus digital question, I guess I'll just kind of specify, are there pieces of analog gear that you still use to this day for any particular reason rather than their digital equivalents or their digital emulations?
I would say first that let me say overall, the analog versus digital is nonsense argument. It's a nonsense argument, right? It's just dumb. It's just like, if the analog works for you, use the analog. If the digital works for you, use the digital. It's all about the end sound. The consumer of the music does not care if you use analog, if you use digital, if you mix it on an SSL, if you mix it in a box, if you mix it on a neat, they don't care. They just care about what comes out of the two speakers. So it's about getting to a point where you're comfortable with what you use. I have people that I love that create a sound with all analog gear, right? My good friend Adrian Young, completely analog studio, gets an incredible sound out of that studio, right? Records the tape, gets all of his sounds up front. I have friends that work completely digital that get great sound. So it's not an analog versus digital debate. They are two completely different things, right? But to answer your question, I think I'm more concerned at this point in the analog world with preamps and what I'm getting that goes into the system. So I'm big on, the 500 series, because I think that's great for people when you can buy, say, an API rack, for 500, or there's plenty of other racks that hold API stuff, which allows, smaller companies to create components that you can put into this rack. And it's sort of something that you could build up over time, right? So you buy the API rack, and then it's like, okay, everybody is in this process of saving up money to get something. So your preamp is the greatest thing for anything. The preamp going into the system is probably more important than buying that. Now, I don't want to say like buy a cheap microphone, right? But if you're in this thing of where you're minding your dollars, and everybody doesn't have all this money to just go, yeah, give me the $10,000 microphone with the $10,000 preamp, you're choosing. So the most important thing in that chain is the preamp. If you have a more expensive preamp with, let's say, a $500 Rhodes mic or some other mic, you're going to get a better thing than buying the super expensive microphone with the real crappy preamp, right? The preamp is where I'm concerned. So I just have a smorgasbord in 500 series of different preamps for recording, right? So I'll have two APIs, I'll have two Neves, I'll have two SSLs, all these different just flavors that people love. And then I sort of go into like more esoteric stuff that people don't know. Those are just the big names, but it's like, what fits you? That's one thing. But let's not get it twisted. In the real world, when I'm in the middle of doing Everything Is Love, and let's say we're still performing shows for Everything Is Love, and Jay-Z is getting masters back, and we're about to do a show, and he's like, okay, well, let's try two basses on these songs, and the album is supposed to come out tonight. You best believe I'm grabbing my UAD, and I'm plugging a bass into there, and I'm using the 1073 from UAD, and I'm using the CL1B as a plug-in, and I'm getting it done. I don't have time to go grab physical gear because I'm about to get on stage and DJ. So a lot of it has to do with what situations are you in. So for anybody to say that you can't get it done with just all digital is lying. It's about the sound and what you want and knowing your tool, right? There are some things that come about because you're using analog gear that creates a certain sound. But we're in a time right now where we can emulate that sound in the digital realm. And I just don't, I'm trying to reinforce this thing of people that have this fight between analog versus digital, right? It's not, they're just two different things, and it's what you pick, that makes the sound. It's you. It's not necessarily just like, oh, just because I got an analog piece of gear, it's going to sound warm. No, it has to be the right piece of gear used in the right way.
Yeah, I mean,
and I'm not qualified to say this, but I got the a 500 series within the last 8 months, and I put a Neve in it, a 500 series Neve preamp, and it changed my sound. And I'm exactly in the situation that you described, where I have the mid-range mic that sounded like a mid-range mic when I plugged it directly into my interface with the preamp that comes with it. I switched it. I put the money out. It was the end of the tax year. I'm like, I got to spend some money. Got the 500 series rack. Got the Neve. Amazing. Night and day difference. So now I'm recommending that more to people. But yeah, go ahead. I mean, I'm not qualified to speak on it. I'm telling you my experience. So Jess, if he's about to blow me out the water with what I just said.
No, I'm just going to say to people, I mean, I definitely agree with everything, that was said there. But for the people at home that don't have this, don't think The reason your music hasn't gone to that next step is because you need a piece of analog gear at home.
Exactly.
There are people that are doing this with no analog gear and making it to, you know, the levels that, you know, we all, you know, hope to once reach. So don't think, you know, yes, I mean, at least in hip hop, from what I've seen, your most important thing is going to be your vocal chain and how you get that signal into there. You know, if you can do that preamp, if you can do the mic, if you can do some analog compression to get the best signal into there, then yes, do it. But don't think that your song isn't doing what it needs to do because you don't have that. You know, and like Guru was saying, you know, I'm a big fan of UAD. I mean, their plugins a lot of times can emulate the stuff I've done, you know, side by side in the studio with things. And like he was saying, your average consumer isn't going to go, oh man, this song would have been better if you just used a real SSL instead of the UAD one. They're not even going to know what's going on there. You're either going to have a good song or you're not. And yeah, just don't think, you know, the other thing too about digital is a lot of times with this music and how it is nowadays, it is so fast paced, like Uber was saying, where you may need to do something right then and there. You may be waiting at the airport or in a hotel room or in the car, and you're not going to be able to, you know, to pull out all this analog gear. You're going to be able to pull out your laptop, plug in your interface or whatever you need, and get it done right there. So that's the benefit to digital, that you can just pull it out, get it done, and keep on moving instead of having to go back to the studio there. But if you have the option to use that analog gear and it's sitting beside you, try it out and see what you can do there.
Yeah. And I think it's ridiculous that I've been in, you know, 3-hour-long arguments with engineers where we're sitting analyzing, like, if I run this same signal through a 1073, a real one, and does this emulation do exactly what it's like? Who cares? If you have the 1073, run it through that. But to sit there and compare like over and over, and we're looking at like charts and it has a little bump, right? Yo, nobody cares about that. Is the song good? That's all that matters. That's all that matters. You have, I could play you, you know, countless Beatles songs that were done on 4 tracks. It's like they're good songs. You know, like that's the whole point. And we're being technical about it, but I'm just trying to drive that thing home because too many people have this argument about like this of course, this analog thing is going to sound different than this digital thing. But it's not about that. That's like comparing apples and oranges. And please don't take away from this that Guru's saying don't use analog. I would love to be in a situation where I have all these separated tracks. I'm mixing them on an SSL 4000 because that's my favorite board. I would love to be hitting a preamp before for every sound. That's beautiful. But that's not the reality of our world anymore. It's just not. And in the world of like having to do, you know, massive recalls or like you said, having to change something on the fly and not being able to, I travel a lot, you know, so I'm not always in the same room. I like to be able to just pull things out, have my laptop, throw on my headphones and be able to roll, or even take my laptop situation. A lot of times my laptop has more plugins and is a better system than the computer that's actually in this $1 million studio. So all I'll do is plug my computer into their system. And thank God we have like Thunderbolt stuff like that now where I can just use a Thunderbolt system that connects to whatever their, you know, maybe Pro Tools outputs are. And I can use my laptop and instead of their computer. And I'm just hooking up the HDMI and I'm using the screen and I'm using Bluetooth. And it's the same thing as I was just sitting there using theirs, but my computer has all the plugins on it. So, you know, it's that thing of being more comfortable. When you pay to go into a major studio at this point, what you're paying for is the room. You're paying for a room that has been designed, treated, you know, understanding what frequencies do to a room, the acoustics of a room, and that's what you're paying for. You're paying for a perfectly tuned acoustic environment to where you can hear properly versus like sitting in your room that may be a box or a square, which a cube is the worst acoustic place that you can sit in and mix music, right? A perfectly done square, which a lot of people's bedrooms or home studios are. So we go through all this process of like trying to defeat that with all this acoustic treatment, right? But that's what you're paying for when you walk into a real studio, and not just the acoustic treatment of what's going on in the studio. It's also what you're keeping out of the studio, right? So that's what the double walls are for. That's what the raised floor is for. Not only just how it's going to bounce off the wall, but you're keeping radio signals out. You're keeping outside noise out. You're keeping, like, all of these things are things you don't think about of why you need to actually go into a major studio. And then again, people hate when I say this. I would love to do all of my projects in a major studio, but a lot of people put out great music that they do in their bedroom.
So let me ask just something, because I know Guru gave us a lot of gems about this. Your recent work with Travis Scott obviously didn't just happen overnight. You spent a lot of time and you know, networked and did what you had to do. But leading up to that, what would you say created that situation for you? And then in addition, what allowed you access? I mean, what was it that you felt you did that gave you that level of legitimacy to find yourself in the studio with, you know, an artist of that caliber and relevance at that point in his career?
It was really just, I mean, putting in the groundwork. I mean, it started off, I moved to Atlanta about 4 years ago. I started off as an intern, a runner at the studio, scrubbing the floors after every session, doing the runs for the artists, and really just staying quiet and showing, you know, the first thing, you know, I tell a lot of engineers, you know, when you intern, one, don't expect to jump in the studio or jump on the boards or record anything for a good amount of time. You need to prove first that you know how to take out the trash and that you can scrub, you know, the floors and you can get a food run right. Because if you can't even do that correct, they're not going to even trust you, you know, turning on these preamps and setting up the studio and recording their clients. So it was really just starting at the bottom, working that way up. And, you know, as I worked at the studio, I interned, I became an engineer there. I was asked to help out with management there. And it was really just engineering there, working with different clients coming in and out and kind of networking with these people and building word of mouth between people. In Atlanta, I started engineering a lot for a lot of producers. And somehow I became one of the go-to guys for producers when they needed to record more than just vocals, when they wanted to bring in, you know, saxophone players and guitar players. And, you know, somebody, I don't know why they preferred me, but, you know, I think it was because just of the vibe that I was able to capture in the studio. And, you know, sometimes I know one of the songs we did a while back with NBA Youngboy, we had live saxophone on there. And we were in a crappy studio, not the microphones you'd want to use, not the preamps you'd want to use, not the computer you'd want to use. But if you're in that situation as an engineer, you need to see what you have around you and you need to make it work. And I think that's one of the reasons that I was just one of those people called upon, is because they know wherever we were at, I will pull up with whatever gear I have, use whatever gear they have, and we will come out with a song after. So as far as Travis Scott went, I'd work a lot with the producer, June the Genius. He just did some stuff on Drake's last album, on Travis Scott's last album. And it was really just a collaborative effort. I think that day we were just making a bunch of samples with some guitars, and, you know, we were just in the studio chopping them up, being the guitar player. And it kind of just got passed back and forth to some people and a whole team collaborative effort. And then next thing you know, he told us the placement there. So I didn't get to meet Travis. We did the beat in Atlanta. June flew out to Houston and through some people met through there and exchanged the beat. And next thing you know, it was history.
Have you actually sat in the studio with Travis when he's recording?
With Travis, I have not. No. A lot of the bigger Atlanta artists, but not Travis. No.
That was That was going to be my question, because when it comes to like the mixing process, one of the interesting things that I found working with Travis is the first day. I don't know if he was doing this out of respect, but like the first day I worked with him, there might have been 2 takes where he's just standing at the microphone, and then he eventually goes like, "Guru, do you mind if I like record myself?" So it got to a point where like I set up the microphone for him, set up the preamp, kind of did the gain structure, but he's so fast in terms of like recording himself. He's now sitting in my seat. I set the mic next to him, and he's just doing takes on his own and actually throwing plugins on because he knows his plugin game so well.
Wow.
And that was going to be my question. Like, do you kind of keep his plugin chain when you're mixing these records? Because what I found was I was like, okay, I might as well just bounce this down and keep this as an audio file, because he's that's part of his sound. He's designed his own sound, you know, and that was all him sitting in that chair You know, and at first he probably just wanted to do it anyway, but didn't want to move me out. And I'm like, yo, if that's how you work, that's perfect. You know, that's part of, I'm saying, like, being able to read the room. And I'm
yeah,
perfect.
Yeah, so one person I noticed that it's exactly like that is Young Thug. Young Thug, I mean, I know we've probably all seen the memes and the pictures of him in front of the computer. But yeah, I mean, Young Thug, he knows Pro Tools in and out. He knows what to do. And, you know, and I've been around, you know, in sessions with him, you know, engineering and with other engineers where if you're not as, and that's one of the big things as an engineer, you have to be quicker than they can think. Mm-hmm. Because if you are not as quick as they can think, you may have an artist like Travis or like Thug where they will ask you, hey, can you scoot over so I can do what I need to do because you're not keeping up with it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, Travis, unfortunately, I can't speak on his process, but it sounds similar to Thug where, you know, they know the sound that they're going for. They know the buttons on there. So like you said, it's reading the room, you know, if they're okay with that. And I've had other artists where they will try pointing something out to me on the screen and I'll just hand them the mouse. And it's not out of disrespect, like, hey, you know, you do this yourself. It's, right. I know we're going to get this a lot done quicker if you just point and click and then pass it back over to me and we keep it up moving there.
Or sometimes it's just the thought process of like, they may be thinking of something and instead of having to go, okay, go now. You know what I mean? They're sitting there and they're thinking of something and then you may be wanting to go or to, you know, sort of like with me and Jay, it's almost like he doesn't have to say go. You know, like I kind of know to stop if he's thinking of a word or something and he kind of gets, then I'm going, you know, or I can like sort of push him to be like, oh, let's get through this. But I found it interesting with like, you know, Travis, where not only was it just because of him wanting to do it, and he's used to doing it that way, just his knowledge of these are the plugins that I use and I've created this sound for myself. So when he's doing like, okay, let me just pull up these 3 plugins and this is my sound, I was like, hey, keep that. And it's easy for me to just bounce down. And now that is what it is, you know? So,
yeah. And that's what I tell a lot of artists too, you know, learn a little bit about the programs that you're recording in, because it, you know, it definitely makes it easier when you can communicate with the engineer exactly, you know, not exactly, or at least, you know, get a ballpark of what sound you're trying to reach, you know, what you're trying to achieve. Because if you know the screen you're looking at and can communicate that stuff, it's going to make these sessions run a whole lot smoother.
I say it to people like this so they can kind of understand it, right? If you have a professional race car driver, he's not the mechanic, right? He's a professional race car driver, but he knows enough about the car that while he's in the race and he comes back, he's not going to be like the same person who just brings a car in and goes, yo, something's clanking. You know, the professional race car driver is going to go, yo, the carburetor needs to be replaced, or you need to replace this time. So now me as the engineer, I'm the mechanic. I get to go in and I'm supposed to be the expert on how to do this the fastest. But the better you can describe the problem to me, you know what I mean? As his job is I want the best car so I can win the race. But he's been around cars his whole life. So obviously he's going to know a little something about engines, but he may not know how to build an engine, right? Where the engineer knows how to build the engine. It's one of those like things where there's a symbiotic relationship, but the more that the race car driver knows about every specific thing about the car, the easier he can explain that to his mechanic.